That's been one of my mantras. Focus and simplicity. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. But it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move mountains. That's one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs, and I think it's a perfect introduction to this video, which is about SwiftUI architecture. Are you working on your own projects? I made a free macOS and iOS app called Launch Buddy that makes it super easy to organize your releases and open tasks. Try it for free today. That's Launch Buddy on the App Store or using the link in the video description. Many different architectures for SwiftUI apps exist, and you might have tried some of them already, like Viper, TCA, Model View Controller, or MVVM, which is generally viewed as one of the best fitting architectures for the SwiftUI framework. Now, while Apple doesn't recommend necessarily using MVVM or any of the other architectures, MVVM is the one that's shown in most videos, in most articles, and I bet a ton of indie apps are actually built using MVVM. There are also a bunch of people preferring TCA, the composable architecture. Now, I'm not an expert in this one, I haven't tried it out myself yet, but I do know how it works. I've seen a few articles and looked at the documentation and so on. For the most time, I have actually used MVVM myself. So in case you're not familiar with it, MVVM stands for Model View View Model. Quite a while ago, I actually made a video talking about my project setup, so all of the folders and files that I set up for a new MVVM SwiftUI project. If you're interested in that, it's linked down in the video description. But a few months ago, I actually stopped using MVVM, and that's what this video will be about. But first of all, let's talk about the results of a poll that I posted on the community tab on YouTube. And if you want to be part of future polls like these, then make sure to subscribe and check out the community tab. Now, as you can see on the screen right now, these are the results, and I asked, how are you architecting your SwiftUI apps these days? And most people, as I actually expected, did choose MVVM, so Model View View Model. A few people chose TCA, View Only, or other architectures. So this is pretty much what I expected. MVVM is one of the most broadly recognized architectures, at least in the tutorial land of SwiftUI. Before I talk about my current favorite architecture, let me quickly go over MVVM and present to you some advantages and disadvantages. I also teach at Code with Chris, a platform with tons of iOS development courses for beginners and advanced developers. So if you want to step up your iOS development skills, Code with Chris Plus is the best place to get started. Use my link in the video description to get started today. First of all, MVVM allows a separation of concerns, which means that the view is only concerned about the UI. It does not have any logic inside of it, which is what you're using the view models for usually. The view models are usually the logic layer between the view, so the UI, and the model, so the underlying data of your app. That means, of course, that it is testable because you can write unit tests for your view models, which should be independent of actual views, so they would be independent of UI in that case. Which means, once again, there is absolutely no logic in your views. All of your buttons, all of your actions in your UI call a method from your view model if you implement it absolutely cleanly. Of course, sometimes you have a bit of logic in your views, but that's up to you. One more thing that I personally really love about view models, MVVM, or actually observable objects, is that they use the add_published property wrapper. Now, really in your day-to-day life, add_published would be used similarly to an add_state variable that would live in your view. So your view can bind to it, it can write data, read data, and update its UI based on the state of that property. Now, what I really love about add_published compared to add_state is that it actually uses combine under the hood, and that we can access that publisher using the projected value, so using the $variable name syntax. And then we can actually build our own combine pipelines, for example, to do something when an input on a text field change. Of course, this can be a lot more complex. Just an easy example why I actually really love the add_published property wrap. Okay, let me quickly also go over some disadvantages of MVVM before I can dive into my current favorite architecture. In my opinion, MVVM for simple apps adds a lot of overhead and abstraction and complexity. So usually I found myself creating a view model that only has, let's say, 2 functions. These functions would then be combined a max of 15 lines of code. Do I really need a separate class for 15 lines of code? if I don't write any unit tests for my side projects anyways? Or should I just add those two functions into my view as functions, not as part of the body of the view, just as functions, and then I can just call them in my buttons and so on. One disadvantage of MVVM, in my opinion, is the added abstraction. With MVVM, you also tend to have a bit more complexity in your views, and hear me out on this, because MVVM is actually meant to reduce complexity in your views, of course, and it mostly does so, but what it can add from time to time is it might require you to implement a custom initializer for your view. Now, what I love about Swift is that member-wise initializers are auto-generated or auto-synthesized for structs, and views are always structs. But if you, for example, pass some data into your view and you need that data in the view model, then you will have to create your own initializer in the view that takes in the data, passes it into a view model, and then binds that view model to a state object in your view. I personally don't like this pattern, which is one disadvantage for MVVM in my opinion. Now, my current favorite architecture, and this might be a bit subjective here, is view only. Now, with that I don't mean to not have model objects. I think model objects are given in any architecture, also in TCA and Viper, even if they don't have the M for model in their name. What I mean by that is no view models, no added abstraction on top of your UI. In my opinion, this is the simplest approach to making SwiftUI, and this is where you feel like you're actually using SwiftUI to its fullest potential, because you're using addState, you're using addBinding, you're using onChange, you're using onReceive, all of these view modifiers and property wrappers that you might not necessarily be using if you have a view model. Of course, if your app gets a bit more complex, I personally still don't use MVVM at the moment. Most of my apps on the App Store actually do use MVVM, don't get me wrong. But in my current state of programming, in my current understanding of what I prefer, I am not using MVVM. But if my apps get too complex, I start implementing service classes. Service classes, in my point of view, are reusable, shared instances, for example, to log in the user to something. For example, to download data from a server. Stuff like that is what I handle using service classes. Also, for example, in-app purchases. I would then have a purchase service which has a shared instance, and I can use that service in all of my views independent of any view model. And now here's the reason why I actually started using view only instead of MVVM, and that's core data. In my opinion, you have the best experience with core data if you don't have any view models. Why is that so? Well, of course, you can create your own NSFetch requests and load your data manually, but then you don't have that awesome live sync in your UI. Of course, you could implement that yourself, but what I really love about core data is the addFetchRequest property wrapper, which allows you to always keep your UI up to date, because internally it listens for changes in the SQLite database of core data and then automatically updates your UI. I absolutely love using this, and this is why I also created the addFirestore query property wrapper for Firebase Firestore about a year ago. It works exactly the same way as addFetchRequest. Both of these property wrappers have in common that they can't really be used in your view models. They are meant to be used in your views as opposed to an addState variable, for example. I absolutely love using them, and I think this is the easiest approach to using core data and Firestore respectively, which is why I initially started to leave out view models of some of my app screens, and then I completely switched to not using view models in my newer apps anymore. There's one more point, which is actually the most important one for me, and that's it makes the development quicker. I have fewer files to go through. I have fewer lines of overhead code I need to write. Usually with your view models, you need to write your own initializers. You need to create one more class and one more file, which has a naming very similar to your view, so you might get confused there. All of that is completely gone. It eliminates some more steps, and it just makes it a lot easier, in my opinion, to get started with an app prototype. But of course, I'm not saying that this is the best for corporate apps. This is not testable whatsoever. Of course, you could theoretically test your views, but that really doesn't make any sense. If you want a testable approach, you should go with TCA or MVVM or any other pattern really that is meant for testing. Now, for my personal side projects, these small apps that are usually built just within a few days, I don't implement unit tests. I'm being honest here. So I do not care about the testability of my architecture. I care about writing the apps quickly and developing a great app with a great user experience. For that, the simplest approach for me is the one that I prefer, which is usually view only. Now, coming to an end here, I'm not telling you to leave out view models and to leave behind TCA. Try out all of the options that you have. Find the one that fits your development style best, the one that you can work with best. And if you found that, please let me know in a comment down below which architecture you prefer using, and also add why you prefer using it. I'm really interested in hearing your opinions. Are you learning something new from this video? Consider subscribing to the channel to become a better iOS developer and stay up to date.